I am Vesper and I'm 27 years old. My father's cliffside mansion in Big Sur is supposed to be a place of breathtaking beauty, a sanctuary of ocean views and redwood forests. Instead, today it was a stage for the final act of a very long, very cruel play. I stood in the rain at the edge of the funeral gathering, my black coat soaked through, watching my stepmother Lenore greet the mourners. She was playing the part of the grieving widow perfectly, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. But then she saw me. She stopped mid-sentence, her gaze sharpening like a blade. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and touched the necklace she was wearing. The Romanov emerald necklace. My grandmother's necklace. The one Grandma had promised to me on her deathbed. The one symbol of love I had left in this family. Lenore stroked the heavy green stones and smirked. It wasn't a smile of welcome. It was a silent, terrifying declaration of war. Before I tell you exactly how I wiped that smirk off her face forever, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I want to see how far this story travels. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge at her to tear that necklace from her throat, even though every nerve in my body was screaming for violence. That is what the old Vesper would have done. The emotional daughter. The one they could dismiss as hysterical and unstable. Instead, I simply turned my back on her and walked toward the mansion. The guests whispered as I passed, probably commenting on my coldness, on how I wasn't weeping over my grandmother's casket. Let them talk. My grief wasn't a heavy coat today. It was a weapon and I was about to unsheath it. The house loomed ahead of me, a modernist monstrosity of glass and steel perched on the edge of the cliff. It didn't look like a home. It looked like an asset, cold and austere, exactly the way my stepmother Lenore liked it. She had spent the last 2 years turning my grandmother's warm, chaotic sanctuary into this sterilized museum piece. She thought she had locked me out of it completely. She thought that by banning me from visiting and blocking my number, she had severed my connection to this place. But Lenore made a critical miscalculation. She forgot what I do for a living. I am a forensic accountant. I don't look for feelings, I look for discrepancies. I look for the truth hidden in the margins of ledgers and the timestamps of digital logs. And 3 months ago, before the silence completely took over, my grandmother managed to send me one final encrypted email. She wasn't senile as Lenore claimed. She was terrified. She gave me the master administrative access to the entire estate's digital infrastructure. Help me with the bills, Vesper, she had written. I don't trust them with the numbers. But she gave me more than just the bank accounts. She gave me the house itself. I stepped into the foyer, the heavy oak door shutting out the sound of the rain and the mourners. The silence inside was thick, expensive, and suffocating. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the smart home app. I wasn't hacking. I wasn't breaking and entering. I was logging in. Lenore thought she held the keys to the kingdom because she physically barred the doors. But in a smart home, physical keys are obsolete. I had eyes in every room. I had ears in every hallway. And for the last 3 weeks I had been watching. I scrolled through the system menu until I found the media controls for the main living room. There it was. The 85-inch ultra-high-definition screen that dominated the wall, currently set to display a tasteful looping slideshow of stock landscape photos during the reception. Lenore loved appearances. She loved controlling the narrative. While I was about to edit her script, I opened a secure folder on my cloud drive. Inside was a single video file, time-stamped from 3 weeks ago. My hand didn't shake as I selected it. I dragged it into the TV's primary queue, setting it to override all other inputs on my command. It was loaded. The trap was primed. All I needed now was for the vultures to come inside to feed. I put my phone back in my pocket and walked into the living room, taking a seat in the corner. I crossed my legs and waited. Patience is the most expensive thing in the world, and today I had plenty of it to spend. As I sat in the corner of that cavernous living room, watching the rain lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows, my mind drifted back to the silence. Not the expensive quiet of this house, but the radio silence that had defined the last 730 days of my life. People might look at me sitting here, calm and collected, and wonder why I didn't fight harder to see her. Why I didn't drive up this cliffside road and break down the door when the phone call stopped. But that's the thing about a predator like Lenore. She didn't build a wall overnight. She laid it brick by brick, lie by lie, until the isolation was absolute. It started 2 years ago. I would call Grandma's cell and Lenore would answer. "She's sleeping, Vesper," she would say, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "She's having a confused day. She doesn't really know who you are right now and I don't want to upset her." That was the narrative Lenore constructed. She painted a picture of a woman rapidly descending into dementia, a woman who needed to be shielded from the outside world. She told the doctors, the neighbors, and even my spineless father that I was the one who was too busy to visit. She told them I was wrapped up in my career, too important to care about an old woman dying by the sea. But I cared. I cared enough to put my money where her lies were. When Grandma first got sick, I didn't trust Lenore to handle the medical logistics. I used my savings to hire a team of private 24-hour nurses. Top-tier care. I wanted witnesses in this house. I wanted professionals who would document every meal, every pill, every decline. For a month I got daily reports. I knew her blood pressure, her appetite, her lucid moments. And then abruptly the report stopped. Lenore fired them. All of them. She sent me a long rambling email claiming they were stealing silverware, that they were negligent, that family care is best. She said she and my father wanted to care for grandma themselves to save money. Save money. In a house worth $8 million, sitting on a portfolio of investments that could fund a small country, Lenore was suddenly concerned about the cost of nursing. I knew then that it wasn't about the budget. It was about the witnesses. She needed the house empty. She needed total control over what went into my grandmother's body and what came out of her mouth. I tried to intervene. I called Adult Protective Services. I demanded wellness checks. But Lenore was charming. She met the officers at the door with fresh-baked cookies and a sad smile, showing them the medical power of attorney my father had coerced grandma into signing years ago. She played the role of the exhausted, devoted caretaker perfectly. The authorities saw a loving daughter-in-law doing her best. I saw a warden tightening the noose. So, for 2 years I was forced to watch from a distance as my grandmother faded into a ghost in her own home. Lenore didn't just steal her life. She stole her end of life. She robbed us of the goodbyes, the hand-holding, the final moments of comfort. She turned this sanctuary into a prison cell. That is why I am not here to mourn today. I grieved my grandmother 2 years ago when the lock clicked shut. Today I am here for something else entirely. I am here to settle the ledger. And if there is one thing a forensic accountant knows, it is that every debt eventually comes due, usually with interest. The storm outside had finally broken against the cliffs, rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows of the dining room with a violence that matched the mood inside perfectly. We were seated at the long mahogany table. My father, my stepmother Lenore, my brother Julian, and me. It felt less like a family dinner and more like a gathering of vultures waiting for the carcass to cool. They were drinking a vintage Pinot Noir, a bottle my grandmother had been saving for her 80th birthday. Lenore had popped the cork without a second thought, pouring generous glasses for everyone but me. I didn't want their wine. I wanted their ruin. My brother Julian wasn't even pretending to mourn. He had his phone propped up against the crystal centerpiece, the ring light reflecting in his eyes. He was live-streaming. "Thank you for the roses, guys," he whispered into the microphone, contorting his face into a mask of tragic, handsome grief. "It's been so hard on us. We're just trying to hold it together for Mom and Dad." He glanced at the viewer count, a flicker of dopamine hitting his brain as the numbers ticked up. Julian was 24, unemployed, and entirely convinced he was the main character of reality. To him, Grandma's death wasn't a tragedy. It was content. "Vesper," Lenore said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the storm. She slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished wood. It stopped inches from my hand. "We need to discuss logistics. Your father and I have been talking and we want to be generous. We know you've been struggling." I looked at the envelope, then at her. I wasn't struggling. I was a senior partner at my firm. But Lenore needed me to be the failure. It was the only way her narrative worked. I opened the flap. Inside was a legal document, crisp and heavy. A quitclaim deed and a non-disclosure agreement. Attached to the front was a cashier's check. I looked at the number. $5,000. "We're buying out your share of any potential claims," Lenore explained, taking a sip of the stolen wine. "It's a lot of money, Vesper. It will help you get back on your feet. All you have to do is sign, take the check, and leave. We think it's best if the estate stays with the people who were actually here to care for her." I looked at my father, Arthur. He was staring intently at his plate, cutting his steak into tiny, precise squares. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He never could. He was the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had read me stories, and now he was letting his wife bribe me with pennies to erase me from my own family. His silence was louder than the thunder outside. "I'm not signing this," I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. "And I don't need your $5,000. Lenore's smile didn't falter, but her eyes went dead. She sighed as if dealing with a petulant child. "Don't be difficult, darling. We're trying to help you. If you fight this, you'll get nothing. Grandma changed her will 3 weeks ago. She left everything to us. The house, the accounts, the jewelry. She knew who truly loved her." She stood up then, tapping her spoon against the side of her wine glass. The sharp ding made Julian look up from his stream. Lenore raised her glass, the diamonds on her wrist catching the chandelier light. "A toast," she announced, looking directly at me with a triumphant sneer. "To family sacrifice. To those of us who stayed. Grandma left this legacy to us because we were the ones holding her hand at the end. We earned this." My father raised his glass. Julian raised his glass. They drank to their own lies. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my chest. We earned this. That was the trigger. That was the permission I needed. I reached into my pocket and unlocked my phone. Lenore thought she was celebrating a victory. She didn't realize she was standing on a trapdoor and I was about to pull the lever. I didn't interrupt her toast with words. Words allow for debate, for gaslighting, for the slippery kind of denials my family specialized in. Instead, I simply tapped the play icon on my phone screen. The smart home system responded instantly. The polite, ambient jazz music cut out. The lights in the dining room dimmed to a cinematic low, plunging the table into shadow. The only source of light was the colossal 85-inch screen on the far wall, which suddenly blazed to life. Lenore froze, her champagne glass halfway to her mouth. Julian lowered his phone, the glow of his live stream illuminating his confused expression. On the screen, the timestamp read 3 weeks ago. The image was crystal clear, high-definition security footage from the kitchen. It showed Lenore standing at the marble island, wearing her silk morning robe. She looked relaxed, humming a tune as she used a heavy mortar and pestle to grind a handful of white pills into a fine powder. In the dining room, Lenore made a broken animal sound and dropped her glass. It shattered, wine bleeding across the white tablecloth. "Turn it off," she hissed, shaking. "It's fake. It's AI. A deep fake." I didn't move. On the screen, Lenore calmly poured powder into a bowl of tomato soup, stirred it, wiped the rim, and placed it on a tray beside fresh flowers. Then my grandmother entered the kitchen, frail, leaning on her walker. She sat. She ate. Minutes later she began to cough. Then choke. She clawed at her throat, gasping, until my father stepped into frame. Arthur froze. On screen my father didn't help. He didn't call for aid. He stood in the doorway watching his mother suffocate. Annoyed. He glanced at the television playing the morning news and slowly raised the volume, 20, 30, 40, until the anchor's cheerful voice drowned out her final breaths. In the dining room he stared at his hands. This is how cruelty becomes normal. Not in one moment but through years of silence. He didn't hate his mother. He turned up the volume because pretending was easier than acting. The video ended on my grandmother slumped forward, lifeless, my father still holding the remote. The silence was total. "You didn't just let her die," I said. "You adjusted the sound mix." Before Lenore could speak, the oak doors were breached. Officers flooded the room, weapons drawn, voices commanding everyone down. I hadn't just shown the video to my family. I had live-streamed it to a private detective and the chief of police waiting outside. The warrant was executed the moment the crime was confirmed. Lenore screamed that it was fake. Arthur said nothing. He wept as cuffs were placed on his wrists, not for his mother but for the life he was losing. They dragged Lenore out kicking and shrieking. I felt nothing. The surgery was successful. I stood to leave. "Where do you think you're going?" Julian blocked my path, phone raised, ring light glaring. He was live streaming. "My sister framed our parents with AI," he shouted. "She was cut out of the will." The family murmured. Julian was the golden boy. Doubt crept in. "You ruined everything," he yelled. "This is my house. Get out." He thought volume could rewrite reality. "You want the legacy?" I asked calmly. "You want everything Grandma left?" I pulled out a blue audit folder. "You forgot the liabilities. 2 years ago Grandma took out a massive reverse mortgage. He drained the estate, sold the stocks, took loans against the art." Julian's face drained of color. "She donated it all to marine conservation. The estate is $12 million in debt. The bank forecloses tomorrow at 9. The room went still. I picked up the Romanov emerald necklace from Lenore's clutch. She sold the real stones years ago. "These are glass. Worth $50. I tossed it to him. "It's all yours," I said. "The debt. The fake jewels. The empty house. Be the king of nothing." I walked out into the rain. I didn't fight for scraps. I walked away because sanity is the only inheritance that matters. Winning isn't taking their money, it's leaving the battlefield. In my mirror, Julian stood screaming in a house he didn't own, clutching glass. I drove on.